further than I'll even say.
I find myself in the unenviable position of being on both sides of the fence. I'm sorry for the pain that the Carters and the Turners are going through, and I'm sorry for what my family is going through. But my family loved Norm. Mercedes and Norm were the best looking couple, and they were looking forward to having their first child. I have no doubt that they would have been good parents because they were parents to everybody else's kids. Norb was thrilled to be a girl dad. He was looking forward to that so much. And I have no doubt that Ava would have had him wrapped around her little face. Ava, I never get a chance to hold her, watch her grow up. She would have been my 6th grandchild.
And how would she have spelled her name?
A-V-A. A-V-A.
And that she would have been your 6th grandchild?
Yes. I find it hard to believe what happened that day. I actually didn't recognize my son and what was going on. I have the advantage of knowing Jason prior to that day. He was never a bad kid. He didn't get in trouble in school, for the most part. He wasn't a criminal, and he wasn't a deadbeat dad. He took care of his kids, and he always had a job. So I can't imagine what stressors took over him that day that made him do what he did. But he's not a career criminal. And I know everybody finds it hard to believe given what happened, but I knew my son, and something had to have happened to trigger his emotions that day. I don't know what it was, but it was devastating. My heart hurts all the time because I don't have my daughter or my son-in-law or my grandchild, and I don't have my son. I know there's a consequence to be paid. I don't know what that's going to be, but that's not what I envisioned for my kids. This is not what I envisioned for my kids, and it hurts. At the end of the day, I love all my kids unconditionally, and despite what happened.
I had no right to take your son, and you're right, that was a very cowardly way to handle my business, and I'm sorry that I did what I did that day. I'm truly sorry for taking Mercedes away from us. It hurts like hell knowing that she's gone. I destroyed the whole family that day. I did, and I deserve whatever punishment that's coming towards me.
On a perfect September afternoon in Maple Heights, Ohio, 3 generations gathered for what they believed would be a simple family picnic. Children played on sun-dappled grass, laughter echoed across Stafford Park, and a pregnant woman glowed with anticipation for her unborn daughter. But hidden beneath the surface of this picture-perfect gathering, a rage had been quietly festering for years. In less than 60 seconds, that rage would erupt into unthinkable violence, leaving a community shattered and asking one haunting question. How could family bonds become so twisted that they'd lead to execution-style murder in broad daylight? This is the story of Mercedes Iverson Carter.
A deadly shooting in the middle of Labor Day picnics at a local park. This morning, a man is in police custody accused of killing his sister and her unborn child and husband. Akira Cotton joins us now live with more details.
Police are calling this a family feud that turned into a deadly shooting. A 30-year-old pregnant woman and her 31-year-old husband were both shot and killed yesterday. The alleged suspect, the woman's 29-year-old brother. It all happened just after 3 p.m. Witnesses say they heard shouting near the parked cars when the suspect shot his sister while her husband ran towards the pavilion. The brother chased after him before also gunning him down. The alleged shooter attempted to run away. However, police caught him and he was taken into custody.
A 30-year-old woman whose very presence could transform any room she entered. In Maple Heights, Mercedes wasn't just another resident. She was the kind of person who made her community better simply by being part of it. Her neighbors knew her as the woman who organized food drives without fanfare, who volunteered at local events with genuine enthusiasm, and who always had time to listen when someone needed support. Mercedes possessed that rare combination of infectious optimism and practical compassion. She didn't just talk about making a difference. She rolled up her sleeves and did the work. Her latest project had been a community garden initiative, transforming neglected spaces into flourishing areas where neighbors could gather, share stories, and watch life grow from the soil up. It was exactly the kind of project that captured who Mercedes was at her core, someone who believed in bringing people together. But Mercedes wasn't just a community organizer. She was also an entrepreneur with big dreams. She'd been planning to launch her own small business, one focused on providing essential services to families who needed them most. Her business plan wasn't driven by profit margins. It was motivated by her desire to fill gaps she'd noticed in her community. Mercedes saw needs others overlooked, and she had the vision and determination to address them. On this particular September day, Mercedes carried more than just her usual radiant energy. She was 6 months pregnant, and her excitement about becoming a mother was evident to everyone around her. She and her partner, Trey Norbert Carter, had been preparing for their daughter's arrival with the kind of joy that's infectious. They'd spent hours discussing names, planning the nursery, and dreaming about the future they'd build together as a family. Trey was Mercedes' perfect complement, steady where she was dynamic, thoughtful where she was spontaneous. Together, they created the kind of partnership that made their friends believe in love. Their relationship wasn't built on grand gestures or social media perfection. It was founded on genuine respect, shared values, and a commitment to supporting each other's dreams. The picnic at Stafford Park had been planned as a celebration of family, multiple generations coming together to enjoy each other's company during one of Ohio's most beautiful times of year. The park itself provided the perfect backdrop: sprawling green lawns, mature trees beginning their autumn transformation, and plenty of space for children to run and play while adults caught up on each other's lives. As families began arriving that afternoon, the atmosphere was everything you'd expect from such a gathering. Coolers filled with homemade food were unpacked, blankets were spread across the grass, and the gentle buzz of conversation filled the air. Children darted between groups of adults, their laughter creating the soundtrack for what should have been a perfect day. Mercedes moved through the gathering like the natural hostess she was, checking on elderly relatives, playing with the kids, and making sure everyone felt included. Her pregnancy hadn't slowed her down. If anything, it seemed to amplify her natural warmth. She had that glow that people talk about, but it wasn't just physical. Mercedes radiated contentment and anticipation for the future. But even as conversations flowed and plates were filled, there were undercurrents that most of the family members couldn't detect. Certain glances held tension. Some conversations stopped abruptly when specific people approached. There were fissures in this family that had been developing for years, hidden beneath polite interactions and forced smiles during gatherings like this one. What none of the picnic attendees could have anticipated was that someone among them had reached a breaking point. Years of resentment, legal battles, and personal grievances had created a pressure cooker situation that was about to explode in the most horrific way imaginable. The irony wasn't lost on those who would later reflect on that day. Here was Mercedes, a woman dedicated to building bridges and fostering connection, surrounded by the people who should have been her greatest source of support and protection. Instead, the very bonds of family that should have kept her safe would become the instrument of her destruction. Before we explore this heartbreaking case, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? And have you ever witnessed how family conflicts can escalate beyond recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive true crime content. To truly understand the magnitude of what was lost that September afternoon, you need to know who Mercedes Iverson Carter really was beyond the community projects and volunteer work. Those who knew her best described a woman who possessed an almost supernatural ability to remember details about people's lives. The kind of person who would ask about your sick parent 6 months later, or remember that your teenager was nervous about college applications. Mercedes had grown up in Maple Heights, watching the neighborhood evolve over the decades. She'd seen businesses close and new ones open, witnessed families move in and out, and observed how economic pressures affected her neighbors. Rather than becoming cynical about these changes, Mercedes developed an entrepreneur's eye for opportunity, combined with a social worker's heart for service. Her business concept wasn't just another startup idea. It was born from genuine observation of her community's needs. Mercedes had noticed how many families struggled to access basic services: reliable childcare, home maintenance, elder care, and transportation. Her vision was to create a service network that could connect these families with trustworthy providers at affordable rates. She'd already begun building relationships with potential partners and had started the paperwork to make her dream a reality. What made Mercedes special wasn't just her ambition. It was how she approached every relationship with genuine curiosity and care. She remembered birthdays without Facebook reminders, sent handwritten notes when people were going through difficult times, and had a gift for making everyone feel like they were her favorite person in the room. Trey Carter brought his own unique strengths to their partnership. Where Mercedes was the visionary, Tria was the pragmatist who helped turn her dreams into achievable goals. He worked in construction, and his practical skills perfectly complemented her big-picture thinking. When Mercedes talked about her business ideas, Tria would quietly research zoning laws, calculate startup costs, and identify potential challenges, not to discourage her, but to help her succeed. Their love story wasn't the dramatic, movie-style romance that dominates social media feeds. Instead, it was built on the kind of steady, day-to-day partnership that actually sustains relationships long-term. Trey supported Mercedes' community involvement even when it meant she'd be out 3 nights a week at meetings. Mercedes encouraged Tria's career goals even when it required financial sacrifices in the short term. When Mercedes discovered she was pregnant, their excitement was contagious. They'd been together for several years and had talked extensively about starting a family, but the reality of pregnancy brought a new dimension to their relationship. Trey became even more protective and supportive, often arriving home with small gifts for Mercedes, her favorite ice cream, a book she'd mentioned wanting to read, or flowers just because. They'd chosen to name their daughter Serenity, a name that reflected their hopes for her future. Mercedes often talked about the kind of mother she wanted to be: present but not hovering, supportive but not enabling. She'd already started reading parenting books and had filled several notebooks with thoughts about child rearing, education, and family traditions she wanted to establish. The nursery had become Trier's weekend project. He'd insisted on building the crib himself, spending hours sanding and finishing the wood to perfection. Mercedes would often find him in the room after work, just sitting quietly and staring at the space where their daughter would soon sleep. When she'd ask what he was thinking about, he'd smile and say he was practicing being grateful. Within their extended family, Mercedes and Trey represented stability and hope. They were the couple other family members looked to as an example of how relationships should work. Mercedes served as the family mediator during disputes, while Tria often helped relatives with home repairs or moving assistance. They hosted family gatherings, remembered to check on elderly relatives, and somehow managed to stay neutral during family conflicts that had divided others. Their financial situation was modest but stable. They weren't wealthy, but they were responsible with money and had started saving for their daughter's education fund before she was even born. Mercedes often joked that they were rich in everything that actually matters. They had each other, supportive family relationships, meaningful work, and a community that valued their contributions. As Mercedes entered her second trimester, she and Trey had started attending parenting classes together. Their instructor later described them as the couple who asked thoughtful questions and clearly took the responsibility of parenthood seriously. They were preparing not just for a baby, but for the lifelong commitment of raising a human being with strong values and genuine compassion. September 15th started like any weekend day in Maple Heights. Clear skies, comfortable temperatures, and the kind of weather that makes people grateful to live in Ohio during autumn. Stafford Park had been chosen for the family gathering because it offered everything needed for a perfect picnic. Plenty of open space, picnic tables, playground equipment for the children, and enough parking for the extended family. Mercedes and Tria arrived around noon, Mercedes practically glowing with excitement about introducing family members to her pregnancy progress. She wore a flowing dress that accommodated her growing belly while still making her feel beautiful. Tria carried their contribution to the potluck, Mercedes' famous potato salad and Tria's grilled chicken that he'd prepared that morning. The early arrivals had already claimed the best spot under a cluster of oak trees that provided natural shade. Folding chairs appeared from car trunks, coolers were positioned strategically around the area, and someone had brought a Bluetooth speaker that filled the air with soft R&B classics. The atmosphere was exactly what you'd expect from a multi-generational family gathering. Children immediately gravitated toward the playground, while adults began the familiar dance of catching up on each other's lives. Mercedes moved through the group like she always did at family events, making sure everyone felt included. She spent time with her elderly aunt, who rarely left her house anymore, helped wrangle some of the younger children, and participated in the good-natured teasing that happens when siblings and cousins reunite. Her pregnancy became a natural conversation starter, with family members sharing advice, touching her belly with permission, and speculating about whether the baby would look more like Mercedes or Trey. For the first few hours, everything proceeded exactly as planned. Food was shared, stories were told, and someone organized an impromptu game of dominoes that drew a small crowd of spectators. The children ran freely between the playground and the family area, their energy adding to the joyful atmosphere. Several family members commented later that it felt like one of their best gatherings in years. But as the afternoon progressed, observant family members began noticing subtle shifts in the dynamic. Certain conversations would stop abruptly when specific people approached. Some family members seemed to be avoiding others, creating small clusters that didn't naturally merge. There were hushed discussions happening at the edges of the gathering, conversations that looked serious and uncomfortable. Mercedes, always attuned to family dynamics, tried to bridge these gaps. She approached different groups, attempted to include everyone in larger conversations, and used her natural diplomatic skills to ease tensions. But even her considerable social abilities couldn't completely smooth over whatever was creating the undercurrent of discomfort. The children were the first to sense that something was wrong. Kids have an almost supernatural ability to detect adult stress, and several of the younger ones began staying closer to their parents instead of running freely around the park. The volume of conversations dropped, laughter became less frequent, and the overall energy of the gathering shifted from celebration to something more subdued. Then, without any additional warning, the afternoon exploded into violence. The first gunshot sounded like a car backfiring, loud enough to make people look up, but not immediately recognizable as gunfire. The second shot eliminated any confusion about what was happening. By the third shot, people were screaming and running. Eyewitnesses later described those moments as completely surreal. One minute, they were enjoying a family picnic, and the next, they were frantically trying to protect themselves and their children from gunfire. The playground, which had been filled with laughing children moments before, emptied as parents grabbed their kids and ran toward their cars. Mercedes, 6 months pregnant and unable to move quickly, became separated from Trea in the initial chaos. Family members who survived described seeing her trying to reach him, calling his name above the screams and confusion. Trea was attempting to get to Mercedes when he was struck down. The shooting lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt eternal to those who lived through it. People threw themselves behind cars, picnic tables, and trees, anything that might provide protection from the bullets. Some family members tried to help others escape, while simultaneously trying to locate their own children and spouses. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. The park that had been filled with laughter and conversation was now eerily quiet, except for the sounds of crying and people calling out names of loved ones they couldn't locate. Emergency responders arrived to find a scene that veteran first responders would later describe as one of the most heartbreaking they'd ever encountered. Personal belongings were scattered across the grass. Children's toys, half-eaten plates of food, and family photos that had been shared during the gathering. The contrast between the evidence of celebration and the reality of violence was staggering. As we reach the most difficult part of this story, I have to pause and ask, how do you think you'd react in a situation like this? Could you ever imagine your own family gathering turning so deadly? Hit that like button if this case is as shocking to you as it was to me, and let's continue uncovering the truth together. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, as emergency responders worked frantically to save lives and secure the scene, investigators began the grim task of identifying the shooter. What they discovered would shake the Maple Heights community to its core and transform this tragedy from a senseless act of violence into something far more devastating: a family's ultimate betrayal. The gunman was Jason Iverson, Mercedes' own brother. This revelation hit the surviving family members like a second wave of trauma. It's one thing to lose loved ones to random violence, but it's an entirely different psychological wound when the perpetrator shares your DNA, your childhood memories, and your family name. Jason wasn't a stranger who had targeted their gathering. He was someone who had sat at their dinner table, shared holidays with them, and knew intimate details about each person he chose to harm. Jason Iverson was 29 years old, just 1 year younger than Mercedes. While she had channeled her energy into community building and positive relationships, Jason had become increasingly isolated and bitter over the past several years. The source of his rage wasn't mysterious or complex. It stemmed from a protracted custody battle that had consumed his life and distorted his perspective on family relationships. Jason had been fighting for custody of his children for over 3 years. Court documents revealed a pattern of escalating legal disputes, missed child support payments, and increasingly hostile interactions with his children's mother. What started as a standard custody disagreement had evolved into something much more toxic, with Jason becoming convinced that his entire family was conspiring against him. In Jason's mind, Mercedes represented everything that was wrong with his life. She was successful where he felt like a failure. She was loved and respected in the community while he felt rejected and misunderstood. Most painfully for Jason, Mercedes was about to become a mother to a child who would be welcomed and celebrated, while his own relationship with his children had become strained and legally complicated. Family members later revealed that Jason had been making increasingly disturbing comments about Mercedes and Tria over the months leading up to the shooting. He expressed resentment about their happiness, their financial stability, and the way other family members seemed to favor them. What relatives initially dismissed as jealousy or temporary bitterness was actually Jason's growing obsession with the perceived injustices in his life. The custody dispute had created fractures throughout the extended family. Some relatives tried to stay neutral, while others had taken sides or offered opinions about Jason's parenting abilities. Mercedes, true to her peacemaking nature, had attempted to remain supportive of Jason while also maintaining relationships with his children's mother. In Jason's distorted thinking, even Mercedes' attempts at neutrality became evidence of betrayal. Court records show that Jason had lost several key custody hearings in the weeks before the shooting. His lawyer had advised him that his chances of gaining primary custody were diminishing, particularly given his increasingly erratic behavior and failure to meet court-ordered requirements. For Jason, these legal setbacks represented not just personal failure, but proof that the entire system, including his own family, was working against him. What makes this case particularly heartbreaking is how Jason's descent into violence could have been prevented if his distress signals had been properly recognized and addressed. Family members later admitted they had noticed changes in Jason's behavior, but no one understood the depths of his rage or his capacity for violence. His increasing isolation, his obsessive focus on perceived slights, and his growing hostility toward Mercedes had been evident, but family members hoped these issues would resolve themselves over time. Investigators determined that Jason's attack wasn't a spontaneous explosion of anger. Evidence suggests he had been planning the shooting for weeks, possibly months. He had specifically chosen the family gathering because he knew Mercedes and Tria would be there, and he understood that maximum family members would witness the violence. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated act of revenge designed to inflict the greatest possible pain on everyone who had failed to support him in his custody battle. The psychological impact of sibling violence extends far beyond the immediate victims. Every family member who survived that day had to confront the reality that someone they had loved and trusted was capable of such devastating betrayal. Children who had played with Jason at previous family gatherings now had to process that their uncle had murdered their aunt. Parents had to grapple with the knowledge that one child had killed another. Jason's actions didn't just end Mercedes and Tria's lives. They destroyed the very concept of family safety and trust for everyone who survived. In a single afternoon, he had transformed every future family gathering into a reminder of loss and every family relationship into something that could no longer be taken for granted. Jason Iverson's legal proceedings moved swiftly through the court system. With overwhelming evidence and his confession, there was little room for legal maneuvering. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Ballistics reports, witness testimonies, and Jason's own statements to police painted a clear picture of premeditated murder motivated by jealousy and resentment. The most powerful moments in the courtroom came when family members testified about Mercedes and Tria as people, not just victims. Mercedes's mother spoke about her daughter's dreams for the community garden, her excitement about becoming a mother, and the way she always made holidays special for everyone. Tria's brother described a man who built cribs by hand and spent his weekends helping neighbors with home repairs without ever expecting payment. But perhaps the most devastating testimony came from Jason's own children's mother, who had been at the center of the custody dispute that triggered his rage. She spoke about the threats Jason had made, his increasing obsession with his perceived grievances, and her growing fear of what he might do. Her words highlighted how Jason's actions had created trauma that extended far beyond the immediate victims. His own children would now grow up knowing their father was a murderer. The judge sentenced Jason to life without parole, noting that his actions had destroyed not just individual lives, but the very foundation of family trust that holds communities together. Jason showed no emotion during sentencing, maintaining the same detached demeanor he had displayed since his arrest. In the months following the trial, Mercedes' family faced the difficult task of healing while honoring her memory. Rather than allowing grief to consume them, they channeled their pain into action. The community garden project Mercedes had been planning became a reality, with volunteers from across Maple Heights donating time and resources to create something beautiful from something broken. The Mercedes Iverson Carter Community Garden opened 18 months after her death, featuring raised beds for vegetables, a children's learning area, and a memorial section with her favorite flowers. The garden wasn't just a tribute, it was a living example of Mercedes' belief that bringing people together could solve problems and create positive change. Mercedes's business concept also lived on through her family's efforts. Local entrepreneurs who had known her worked together to establish a community service network that connected families with reliable, affordable help for childcare, elder care, and home maintenance. The program operates under Mercedes' original vision of supporting families who might otherwise struggle to access these essential services. But the most important legacy of this tragedy has been the conversations it sparked about family violence and conflict resolution. The case forced the Maple Heights community to confront uncomfortable truths about how quickly family disputes can escalate, and how often threats are dismissed until it's too late. Local counselors reported a significant increase in families seeking help with conflict resolution in the aftermath of the shooting. Parents who might have previously ignored concerning behavior from adult children began taking threats more seriously. Families dealing with custody disputes sought mediation services to prevent their conflicts from escalating. The case also highlighted the particular dangers of custody battles that become consuming obsessions. Family court officials began implementing new protocols for identifying when custody disputes were escalating beyond normal legal proceedings into potentially dangerous territory. These changes included mandatory counseling for parents showing signs of extreme stress and better coordination between family courts and law enforcement. Mercedes' story became a teaching tool for domestic violence prevention programs, not because she was in an abusive relationship, but because her death illustrated how family violence can come from unexpected sources. The case demonstrated that threats should be taken seriously, regardless of the relationship between the threatening party and potential victims. Perhaps most importantly, the tragedy sparked broader discussions about how communities can better support people going through major life crises before those crises turn into violence. Mercedes had tried to be supportive of Jason while maintaining her own boundaries, but she lacked the tools and resources to effectively intervene in his deteriorating mental state. Community leaders organized workshops focused on recognizing when someone's stress and anger are escalating beyond normal levels. These sessions taught family members how to set appropriate boundaries, when to seek professional help, and how to protect themselves while still showing love and support for struggling relatives. The annual Mercedes Iverson Carter Memorial Walk takes place each September at Stafford Park, bringing together hundreds of community members to remember her life and commitment to positive change. The walk isn't just about mourning, it's about celebrating the ongoing impact of her vision for a more connected, supportive community. 3 years after the shooting, Mercedes' mother still tends the memorial garden regularly. She says working with the soil and watching things grow helps her feel connected to her daughter's spirit. The garden has become a gathering place where neighbors meet, children learn about growing food, and people find peace in the middle of urban life. If this case teaches us anything, it's that the bonds of family, while powerful, require constant care and attention. Mercedes understood this instinctively, which is why she worked so hard to maintain relationships and resolve conflicts peacefully. Her death serves as a tragic reminder that love alone isn't always enough to prevent violence when mental health issues, legal pressures, and personal grievances are allowed to fester without intervention. The Mercedes Iverson Carter story reminds us that behind every headline about family violence are real people whose lives mattered, whose dreams were cut short, and whose legacies can inspire positive change if we're willing to learn from their loss. Her memory lives on, not in the tragedy that ended her life, but in the community connections, peaceful conflict resolution, and acts of service that continue in her name.